8 out of 10 people who start this kind of journey never change anything measurable in their lives. Not because the information was wrong, because their behavior never stabilized long enough to use it. That is the part most introductions avoid. You've been told your limitation is lack of belief, lack of confidence, lack of clarity. That sounds reasonable. It's also incomplete. If belief were the constraint, then access to information alone would solve it. And it hasn't. Most people already know what they should do. So why does nothing hold? Watch the pattern without defending it. You begin when motivation rises. You push while it feels aligned. Then friction appears, fatigue, distraction, doubt, and the action weakens. Within days, the structure dissolves. Within weeks, you're back at baseline. This is not occasional. It's how most people operate by default. A smaller group behaves differently, but not in the way you expect. They don't rely on feeling ready. They remove that dependency. Their actions are anchored to something external to mood, time, environment, sequence. That's why they continue when others stop. The difference is structural. This audiobook is built around that premise. Not inspiration, structure, not intensity, repeatability. Because potential without a mechanism is inert. Like pressure sealed inside a container with no release valve. It exists but produces nothing. So the question shifts. Not how much potential do you have, but what converts it into output? The answer is smaller than most people are willing to accept. Repetition. Not dramatic, not impressive, just stable. Behavioral studies on habit formation, including longitudinal work from University College London, consistently show that actions become automatic through consistent repetition, not bursts of effort. It takes time. It feels uneventful, which is why most people abandon it early. They expect visible change before the system has time to form, so they reset. Now look at attention. On an average day, people shift focus dozens of times. Messages, tabs, notifications, impulses. Each break looks harmless. It isn't. Research on cognitive interruption shows that after a distraction, it can take over 20 minutes to return to deep focus. That means most days are not continuous work. They are fragments stitched together. Fragments don't compound. This is where perceived effort diverges from actual progress. You feel active. Output stays flat. Then comes failure. Most people read it as a personal flaw. They question discipline, motivation, identity. Rarely do they audit the system that produced the result. If the structure remains unchanged, the outcome repeats. That's not pessimism. That's mechanics. Input, system, output. Change the input without changing the system, and the output stays within the same range. So the goal here is not to push harder inside the same loop. It's to interrupt the loop. Replace unstable triggers, motivation, mood, with stable anchors. Time, sequence, environment. Reduce the number of decisions required to act. Build actions that can survive low energy, not just high energy. Small shifts, but they accumulate. Like weight added to a lever, barely visible at first, then suddenly enough to move something that wouldn't budge before. If you move through this passively, the outcome will match what happens to most people: recognition without change. If you apply even one mechanism and repeat it until it holds, the trajectory alters, not dramatically, structurally. And once that structure is in place, the question changes again. Not, can you reach your potential, but why wasn't it happening before? Chapter 1. Discovering your true potential. There is a version of you that has never been used. Not hidden, not lost, simply never activated. And the unsettling part is this. You have been living beside it your entire life without noticing. Look at the structure of an ordinary day. Not the dramatic moments, just the quiet sequence that repeats. The same decisions made almost automatically. The same reactions triggered without thought. The same limits accepted without inspection. It feels natural, familiar, even stable. But stability can be deceptive, because what feels like who you are is often just what you have repeated the most. This is where the misunderstanding begins. People speak of potential as if it were something rare, almost mystical, an invisible gift placed into a few, withheld from the rest. But that idea does not survive close examination. What you call potential is not a privilege. It is capacity. The ability of a system to expand beyond its current state when exposed to the right conditions. And every human system has that property. The difference is not possession. It is activation. To see that clearly, you don't imagine a future version of yourself. You observe the present one. The way you live right now. the patterns, the habits, the choices you repeat. These are not random fragments. They form a structure, and that structure produces consistent outcomes. Your current life is not an accident. It is a result. Most people sense this, but they don't follow it far enough. They feel stuck, but they don't trace the mechanism. Instead, they assume permanence. They begin to believe that their circumstances define their range. But that belief is structurally incorrect, because systems can be altered, and when a system changes, its output follows. This is where something shifts, not emotionally, but logically. If your life is shaped by patterns, then growth is not a mystery. It becomes a function of changing those patterns. Not occasionally, not when it feels right, consistently. This is what most people avoid. They wait. They wait for clarity, for confidence, for the moment when action feels justified. But that moment rarely arrives in the way they expect. Because readiness is not a condition you reach before acting. It is a condition produced by acting. The sequence matters. Action, evidence, belief. Not the reverse. This is where self-doubt enters the system, not as truth, but as interference. It appears quietly. Small hesitations, internal comparisons, a subtle pull away from effort. It suggests that others are more capable, more prepared, more suited. Over time, this pattern stabilizes, but it has no structural foundation. It persists because it is not challenged. The only reliable way to destabilize it is through contradiction, through action that produces evidence against it. Each time you do something slightly beyond your current range, you create data. That data accumulates, and slowly, the internal narrative begins to shift. Not because you forced belief, because you observed change. Now consider how you interpret ability itself. Some people operate as if their capacity is fixed, unchangeable. When they encounter difficulty, they withdraw. Others operate under a different assumption. That ability expands under pressure. That effort is not proof of weakness, but a mechanism of growth. This difference is not philosophical. It determines behavior. Research in cognitive psychology, particularly the work of Carol Dweck, shows that individuals who treat ability as developable persist longer and adapt more effectively under challenge. Not because they begin stronger, but because they do not stop when resistance appears. So the question is not whether growth is available. It is whether you are operating under conditions that allow it. Most people underestimate themselves for a simple reason. They measure their capacity based on familiar patterns. If something has always been difficult, it begins to feel impossible. But familiarity is not evidence. It is repetition. There are moments, specific, undeniable, where you have exceeded your own expectation, where you adapted, endured, solved, or continued beyond what you previously believed you could. Those moments are not exceptions. They are signals, indicators that your current behavior does not represent your full range. Fear is what restricts access to that range. Not dramatically, but systematically. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of entering uncertainty. Most people respond by reducing exposure. They stay within predictable limits, but avoidance reinforces the boundary. Exposure shifts it. Each time you act despite discomfort, the nervous system recalibrates. What once triggered hesitation becomes manageable. This is not abstract, it is observable across behavior. Repeated exposure reduces perceived threat. That is how courage forms. Not as a trait, but as a pattern of response. Failure follows the same structure. Most people treat it as a stopping signal. But failure is not an endpoint. It is feedback. It reveals where the system broke. If the system is adjusted, the result changes. If not, it repeats. Which brings us to direction. Without a defined target, effort disperses. Energy is spent, but not concentrated. Goals exist to organize behavior, to create alignment between action and outcome. But vague goals are ineffective. I want to be better does not guide behavior. It does not define action. A functional goal specifies both direction and process. It tells you what to do next. Without that clarity, consistency breaks. And without consistency, nothing compounds. This is where discipline becomes relevant, not as force, but as stability. Motivation fluctuates. It depends on conditions, sleep, mood, environment. Discipline operates independently. It maintains action when conditions are not ideal. That is why it works, because it removes variability. Over time, disciplined behavior compounds into something larger than effort. It becomes structure. And once structure stabilizes, progress becomes predictable. Environment accelerates or slows that process. The people around you, the standards you observe, the information you consume, these inputs shape behavior. Negative inputs fragment attention. Constructive inputs reinforce direction. This is not abstract influence. It is system conditioning. And yet, none of it activates without execution. Understanding alone does nothing. Planning alone does nothing. Only action alters the system. Not large action. Repeatable action, small enough to sustain, stable enough to continue. This is how potential becomes visible, not as an idea, as output, because potential was never absent. It was waiting for a system that could carry it. And until that system exists, it remains exactly where it has always been, unused. Chapter 2. Breaking free from self-doubt. You've mistaken hesitation for intelligence for so long. It now feels like wisdom. That is where self-doubt becomes dangerous. Not when it is loud, but when it sounds reasonable enough to trust. When it enters quietly at the exact moment you are about to move forward and reframes retreat as careful thinking, restraint as maturity, delay as strategy. And so you pause, not because you decided to stop, but because stopping felt like the correct move. If you slow that moment down, you can see it clearly. There is always a point, just before action, where something subtle interrupts the flow. A thought appears, often framed as a question, carrying just enough logic to weaken your certainty. Maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe you're not fully prepared. Maybe you should wait until things are clearer. Nothing external has changed, but internally, momentum breaks. This is how self-doubt functions, not as an obstacle in front of you, but as a shift inside you that alters direction before you even begin. Most people never examine this shift. They assume the hesitation must be valid because it feels rational. But the mechanism underneath tells a different story. The human mind is not designed to evaluate opportunity accurately. It is designed to detect risk efficiently. It prioritizes what could go wrong, amplifies uncertainty, and presents those projections as if they were grounded conclusions. They are not. They are defensive constructions. And yet, behavior responds to them as if they were real. You begin calculating outcomes that have not occurred, preparing for consequences that have not arrived, adjusting your actions based on events that exist only in imagination. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. You don't consciously decide to hold back. You simply do. This is where most potential gets trapped, not by inability, but by untested assumptions. The mistake is not experiencing doubt. That is inevitable. The mistake is assigning it authority, treating it as instruction instead of signal. Doubt does not mean stop. It means this is unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity has a predictable response pattern. It becomes easier with exposure. This is consistent across human behavior. When the nervous system encounters something new, it increases alertness. If the experience is avoided, that alertness remains. If the experience is repeated, the system adjusts. What once triggered resistance becomes manageable, then neutral, like entering a dark room. At first, nothing is visible. The mind fills the space with imagined shapes. But remain there long enough, and your vision adjusts. The room does not change. Your perception does. Self-doubt operates within that same structure. Avoid it, and it expands. Engage it, and it contracts. Now consider what happens when something doesn't work. Most people collapse the outcome into identity. A failed attempt becomes proof that they are not capable. But failure does not measure you. It reveals the gap between intention and execution. It shows where the structure needs adjustment. That distinction is critical. If you treat failure as identity, you stop. If you treat it as information, you continue. The individuals who progress are not those who avoid mistakes. They are those who remain in motion long enough to refine their approach. Over time, that refinement produces results that look like confidence from the outside. But confidence was never the starting point. It was the accumulation of corrected action. Attention determines how this process unfolds. When doubt appears, most people shift focus toward what is missing. Skills they don't have, experience they haven't gained, qualities they believe others possess in greater measure. This comparison distorts perception. It removes context, compresses progress, and creates an artificial standard that is impossible to meet in the moment. But there is another reference point available. Your own history. There are moments, clear, undeniable, where you moved beyond your previous limits, where you adapted, persisted, solved, or continued under pressure. Those moments are not exceptions. They are evidence. They demonstrate that your current hesitation is not a fixed boundary, it is a temporary state. Yet evidence alone does not stabilize behavior. Repetition does. This is where action becomes essential, not as effort, but as calibration. Each time you act despite uncertainty, you generate feedback. That feedback replaces imagined outcomes with observed ones. Over time, the gap between expectation and reality closes. And as that gap closes, doubt loses precision. It becomes less accurate, less convincing, easier to move through. Large goals often distort this process. They compress time, exaggerate difficulty, and create a sense of distance that feels unmanageable. The mind responds by stepping back. But when the same goal is broken into smaller, immediate actions, the structure changes. The next step becomes clear, and clarity reduces resistance. Each completed step reinforces capability. Each reinforcement weakens doubt. This creates a sequence, action, feedback, adjustment, that gradually replaces hesitation with movement. Not through force, through continuity. Environment influences this sequence more than most people realize. If hesitation is reinforced around you, it becomes normalized. If action is reinforced, even in small ways, a different pattern emerges. You begin to see that movement does not require certainty, only initiation. The same applies to input. What you expose your mind to repeatedly shapes expectation. If your input is fragmented, negative, inconsistent, your thinking follows that pattern. If it is structured, intentional, aligned with growth, your internal system begins to reflect that structure. Not instantly, but inevitably. And eventually something becomes clear in a lead that does not rely on belief. The voice is still present, it still speaks, but it no longer directs. Because you have seen, through repeated experience, that it was never predicting your limits. Only your hesitation. Chapter 3. Setting clear goals that actually work. A vague goal feels safe, because it allows you to believe you're moving forward without ever risking being wrong. Think about the last time you said you wanted something meaningful, something that sounded important when you spoke it out loud. Maybe it was becoming healthier, more successful, more fulfilled. The words felt right, almost convincing, like drawing a shape in the air without ever touching the ground. And yet, nothing moved, because a direction that cannot be executed is not a direction. It is a feeling. This is where most goals collapse before they even begin. Not from lack of effort, but from lack of structure. A vague goal creates a vague path, and a vague path produces hesitation. The mind cannot act on something it cannot see clearly. It delays, not because it is weak, but because it is uncertain. Uncertainty slows everything. Imagine standing at the start of a long road with no markers, no signs, no defined endpoint, only a general sense that you should move forward. You might take a few steps, maybe even walk for a while, but eventually the question appears, am I even going in the right direction? And once that question appears, momentum weakens. This is why clarity is not optional. It is functional. When a goal becomes specific, something changes immediately. It stops being an idea and becomes a sequence. I want to be healthy transforms into 30 minutes of movement each day for the next 90 days, and suddenly the mind has something to work with. There is a defined action, a measurable duration, a visible endpoint. Now the system can engage, because it knows what to do next. This is not about motivation. It is about reducing ambiguity. Research in behavioral science has consistently shown that when a task is clearly defined, when the next step is obvious, people are far more likely to follow through. Not because they feel more inspired, but because they feel less resistance. Clarity lowers friction, and friction determines whether action happens. But clarity alone is not enough. There is another point where most people break: the scale of the goal itself. When the objective is too large, the mind compresses it into a single demand. Write a book becomes overwhelming, not because it is impossible, but because it lacks visible structure. The brain cannot process it as a sequence, so it delays. Not out of fear, out of overload. The solution is not to shrink the goal, but to deconstruct it. Break it into parts that can be executed repeatedly, 500 words a day, 1 hour each morning, 1 chapter at a time. Now the path becomes visible. The distance is still there, but it is no longer abstract. It becomes navigable. Like crossing a river, not in one leap, but by stepping stone to stone, each movement grounded, each step reinforcing the next. This is where momentum begins, not from intensity, but from continuity. and continuity requires alignment. A goal that does not connect to what you actually value will not hold under pressure. It may look impressive, even logical, but if it is not rooted in something internal, it will weaken over time. You will delay, skip, disengage, not because you are undisciplined, but because the system has no internal support. This is why some people work hard and still feel disconnected. They are building something they do not truly want. When a goal aligns with what matters, energy, independence, mastery, freedom, it becomes easier to sustain. Not effortless, but stable. You no longer rely entirely on external push. The structure carries itself. Now introduce time into the system. Without a defined time frame, goals expand indefinitely. Someday becomes a place where intention dissolves. A deadline compresses that expansion. It creates pressure, not to overwhelm, but to contain. It forces action into the present instead of allowing it to drift into the future. This is why time matters. Not as urgency, but as boundary. But no system survives without flexibility. Life does not move in straight lines. Conditions shift, obstacles appear, progress slows. When that happens, rigid systems break. Adaptive systems adjust. The direction remains, but the method evolves. Like a traveler changing route without abandoning the destination. This is not failure, it is refinement. Now consider another layer. Accountability. When no one sees your progress, it becomes easier to disconnect from it. Not immediately, but gradually. The structure weakens because it exists only internally. But the moment another person becomes aware, someone who asks, observes, reflects, something stabilizes. The commitment becomes external, and external commitment is harder to ignore. You do not need a large network. One person is enough. Now shift to something less visible. Visualization. Not as fantasy, but as rehearsal. When you repeatedly picture yourself executing the steps, handling difficulty, continuing despite resistance, the mind begins to treat that path as familiar. And familiarity reduces hesitation. You are not imagining success. You are practicing the process. And that distinction matters. Fear still appears. It always does when something meaningful is at stake. But most fear is not based on real events. It is constructed, scenarios built from incomplete information, projected forward, amplified, then mistaken for prediction. And because they feel vivid, they influence behavior. But when tested, they rarely unfold as imagined. This is why action is necessary, not to eliminate fear, to correct it. Now consider perfection, the quiet delay mechanism, waiting until everything is ready, until conditions align, until execution feels flawless. But perfection is not a stage you reach before beginning. It is a standard that prevents beginning. Progress is iterative. It is built through imperfect action, corrected over time. Each step refines the next. Waiting does nothing but extend delay, and delay compounds faster than progress. So the entry point remains the same. Start where you are, with what you have, and adjust as you move. Over time, something changes, not in a dramatic shift, but in structure. You begin to operate differently. Action becomes more consistent, feedback becomes more accurate, the system stabilizes, and once it stabilizes, results follow. Not because you pushed harder, because you built something that could carry you. Which brings everything back to a single point. You were never lacking ambition. You were moving without a structure precise enough to turn it into reality. And once that structure appears, drifting is no longer possible. Chapter 4. Turning dreams into action. A dream that stays in your head long enough slowly turns into a place you visit instead of a life you build. At first it feels powerful. You imagine it clearly. What you could become, what you could create, how different things could be. There's energy in that moment, a sense of expansion, like something just opened. And for a while that feeling is enough. It gives you direction without requiring movement. But then something subtle happens. Time passes, and the dream remains exactly where it was. Not closer, not clearer, just untouched. This is where most people misunderstand the nature of dreams. They treat them as beginnings, when in reality, they are only signals, a direction pointing outward, not a force that moves anything on its own. Without action, a dream does not develop. It repeats, like a thought you return to, again and again, until it becomes familiar, but never real. The shift begins the moment you stop asking what the dream looks like, and start asking what it requires. Because every outcome, no matter how large, is built through smaller units of execution. The problem is not that dreams are too big. The problem is that they are held as single objects instead of being broken into sequences. When the mind sees something too large, it delays. Not from weakness, but from overload. It cannot process the path, so it stays in place, but reduce the scale. Focus on one step, one action, and something changes. The abstract becomes concrete. The distant becomes immediate. What is the first move becomes more useful than how will this all work? That first move carries more weight than it appears because it changes your position from observer to participant. And once that shift happens, momentum begins. Not instantly, not dramatically, but measurably. Like a snowball that does not look like much when it starts, but gains mass with each rotation, each movement adding to the next until stopping requires more effort than continuing. This is how action builds, not through intensity, but through accumulation. Now introduce time into that system. Without a boundary, action expands into delay. Tomorrow becomes a flexible space where nothing is required. But the moment you assign a time frame, clear, defined, something tightens. The mind shifts from possibility to execution. Not because it is pressured, because it is directed. Deadlines create edges, and edges force decisions. You stop considering whether you will act and begin determining how. This is where progress becomes visible, because once action is structured, it can be measured. You can see movement, you can track distance. Each completed step reinforces the process, not emotionally, but structurally. You are no longer guessing, you are building. But movement alone is not enough, because the system will be tested. There will be moments where progress slows, where results are unclear, where effort feels disconnected from outcome. This is where many people stop, not because the path is wrong, but because feedback is delayed. They expect confirmation too early, but most processes do not reward immediately. They accumulate first, then they reveal. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Showing up repeatedly, even when the result is not yet visible, is what stabilizes the system. It reduces dependence on motivation and replaces it with continuity. Like a machine that continues operating, regardless of whether the output is immediately visible. Over time, the output appears, and when it does, it reflects everything that was done before. Fear enters at predictable points, not at the beginning, but in the transition from thinking to doing. The mind begins projecting outcomes. Failure, judgment, loss, and presents them as if they were likely. But these projections are rarely accurate. They are constructed from incomplete data, and they influence behavior only when untested. The moment you act, the projection is replaced by reality, and reality in most cases is less extreme than the mind predicted. This recalibration matters, because it weakens hesitation. Now consider focus. In a world full of constant interruption, sustained attention becomes rare. It is easy to begin something, then shift to something else before completion. Each shift breaks continuity, and without continuity, nothing compounds. Progress requires completion, not constant movement between tasks, but depth within a single direction. When you commit to a task and remain with it, even briefly, you reinforce the pattern of completion. That pattern accumulates. Over time, it becomes easier to stay engaged, not because the task changes, because your behavior does. Environment influences this more than most people realize. Distraction is not random. It is designed. Notifications, noise, interruptions, they pull attention away from what matters. If you do not control that environment, it will control your output. So reducing distraction is not preference, it is necessity. The clearer the environment, the easier it is to maintain direction. Overwhelm is another predictable point of failure. When the full scope of a dream is held in mind, it creates pressure. The mind interprets the distance as immediate demand. The response is shut down, not from incapability, but from overload. This is why narrowing focus works. What is the next step reduces the field, and a reduced field allows movement. Each step completed reduces uncertainty. Each reduction lowers resistance. Over time, what once felt overwhelming becomes routine. This is how large outcomes are built. Not by confronting the entire path at once, but by resolving it piece by piece. Now return to something deeper. Why the dream exists in the first place. Because without that connection, the system weakens. When effort becomes difficult, when progress slows, when doubt appears, the only thing that sustains movement is meaning. Not abstract meaning, but something specific. What this leads to, what it changes, why it matters. That reason stabilizes behavior when motivation drops. It becomes the underlying force, not visible, but constant. Perfection interferes here. It suggests waiting until conditions are ideal, until execution is flawless, until uncertainty disappears. But perfection is not a stage. It is a delay mechanism. The longer you wait for it, the further you move from action. Progress does not require perfection. It requires iteration. Starting with what is available, adjusting as you go, refining through repetition. This is the only pattern that produces results. Everything else extends delay, and delay compounds. So the structure remains simple, even if it does not feel easy. Break the dream into parts, define the next step, act within a time frame, repeat, adjust, continue. Over time, something changes, not suddenly, but unmistakably. The distance between idea and reality begins to close. The dream loses its abstract quality and starts to take form. Not because it was destined, because it was executed. And eventually, without needing to announce it, you realize something that cannot be reversed. What once existed only in your mind now exists in your life. Chapter 5. Building strong daily habits. If someone could watch only your ordinary days, not your plans, not your ambitions, just your repeated actions, they would be able to predict your future with uncomfortable accuracy. That is the part most people try not to see, because it removes the illusion that big change comes from big moments and replaces it with something far less dramatic but far more precise. What you repeat becomes what you are, and what you are determines what you get. Look closely at how a day unfolds. Nothing feels decisive. You wake up, move through routines, make small choices that barely register. What to eat, what to open, what to delay, what to ignore. Each decision seems insignificant on its own, almost too small to matter. But the system does not evaluate actions individually. It evaluates patterns, and patterns accumulate. This is why habits are not just supportive behaviors. They are structural. They determine direction long before results appear. The person who moves slightly forward every day will eventually surpass the one who waits for the right moment to move at all. Not because of intensity, because of continuity. Yet most people focus on intensity. They commit to large changes, long workouts, strict schedules, complete overhauls, believing that effort must feel difficult to be effective. For a short period, it works. Energy is high. Motivation is present. Then the system collapses. Not because the goal was unrealistic, because the method was unsustainable. The brain resists sudden, large disruptions to routine. It interprets them as instability, increasing friction, draining energy, and eventually forcing a return to familiar patterns. This is why small changes persist while large ones fail. A short daily action, repeated, creates less resistance than a large action attempted occasionally. And resistance determines repetition. Repetition determines outcome. Consider something simple. Practicing a skill for 15 minutes a day. At first, it feels negligible. The improvement is not obvious. There is no immediate reward. But after weeks, something shifts. The skill begins to stabilize. Movements become easier. Understanding deepens. Not because of any single session, because of accumulated repetition. Like water shaping stone, not through force, but through persistence. This is the mechanism behind habits. Now introduce clarity. A habit that is not clearly defined will not hold. I should do more creates no action. The brain cannot execute ambiguity, but a defined behavior, same time, same context, same action, removes uncertainty. The decision is already made, and when decisions are reduced, execution becomes easier. This is why starting small is not a compromise. It is strategy. A 30-minute walk is more sustainable than an unrealistic training plan. A few pages read daily produce more understanding than occasional bursts of effort. Small actions reduce the barrier to entry, and once entry becomes easy, repetition becomes possible. From repetition, momentum forms, but momentum requires focus. Trying to build multiple habits at once scatters attention. Each behavior competes for space, reducing consistency across all of them. But when one habit is stabilized, repeated until it becomes automatic, it creates a base. From that base, another can be added. Layer by layer, the system expands, without collapse. Environment shapes this process more than most people realize. Behavior is not only internal, it is influenced by what is visible, accessible, and immediate. If distraction is always within reach, attention fragments. If desired actions require effort to initiate, they are delayed. But when the environment is adjusted, when what you need is placed in front of you, When distractions are reduced, the path of least resistance changes, and behavior follows the path of least resistance. Accountability strengthens it further. Left alone, habits are easier to break. Not because of lack of discipline, but because there is no external reference. But when another person is aware, when progress is shared, behavior stabilizes. The pattern becomes visible, and what is visible is harder to ignore. Tracking creates another layer of reinforcement. In the early stages, progress is often invisible. You act, but results do not appear immediately. Without feedback, the mind questions the value of continuing. But when you track behavior, marking each repetition, you create visible proof of continuity. The system begins to recognize that something is building. Even if the outcome has not yet appeared, rewards amplify this. Not large rewards, but small, immediate reinforcements that associate the behavior with a positive signal. Over time, the brain begins to link the habit with reward, increasing the likelihood of repetition. And repetition is what matters. Resistance remains part of the process. There will be days where the habit feels unnecessary, where energy is low, where distraction is more appealing. These moments are predictable. The system is not designed to eliminate them, it is designed to move through them. Reducing the scale of action becomes critical here. When full effort feels difficult, a smaller version maintains continuity. A shorter session, a minimal action, enough to keep the pattern intact. Because once the pattern breaks repeatedly, rebuilding becomes harder. Now consider failure. Most people treat a missed day as collapse. A break in the pattern becomes an excuse to abandon it. But a single interruption does not erase progress. Only repeated interruption does. The system is more stable than it appears. Return to it. And it continues. Over time, something changes. The action becomes automatic. It no longer requires negotiation. The brain no longer treats it as optional. It becomes part of identity, something you do without deciding. This is where habits become powerful, when maintaining them requires less effort than avoiding them. At that point, progress accelerates, not through increased effort, through reduced resistance. There will still be periods where progress feels slow, where results lag behind effort. This is where many systems fail, not because they are ineffective, but because they are abandoned too early. But every repetition is stored. Every action contributes. Like a structure forming beneath the surface, invisible until it reaches a threshold. And when it does, it appears as if change happened suddenly. But it didn't. It was built quietly. Which leads to a final recognition, one that removes the need for motivation entirely. You were never one decision away from changing your life. You were one consistent pattern away. And patterns, once established, do not ask for permission to shape what comes next. Chapter 6. Overcoming fear and failure. There is a version of your life that never happens, not because it was impossible, but because you turned away a few seconds too early, at the exact point where uncertainty first appeared, and your mind quietly suggested that stepping back would be the smarter move. No collapse, no visible failure, just a withdrawal that felt justified. If you examine those moments closely, they all share the same structure. You move toward something that matters, something slightly beyond your current range, and almost immediately the mind begins to simulate outcomes, fast, detailed, and heavily biased toward what could go wrong. It does not say, "This will fail." It shows you enough possibility that continuing feels irresponsible. And that is the precision of fear. It does not block you, it persuades you. Most people never question that persuasion because it feels internal, familiar, even rational. But what the mind produces in those moments is not a forecast. It is a protective distortion. The brain is wired to detect potential loss more strongly than potential gain, a bias well documented in behavioral science, where negative outcomes are weighted more heavily in decision-making than positive ones. So when you approach something uncertain, the system amplifies risk. Not because the risk is real, because the system is designed to avoid it. This is why fear feels intelligent. But intelligence and accuracy are not the same, and this is where the pattern forms. Each time you step back, the system records it as confirmation. Avoidance strengthens the signal. The next time you approach a similar boundary, the response is faster, more convincing, more difficult to challenge. Over time, the range of what feels safe becomes narrower, and what lies outside that range begins to feel unreachable. Not because it is, because it has not been tested. This is the part most people never confront. Fear does not grow from reality. It grows from repetition without contact. The only way to change that is not through reassurance, not through analysis, but through direct engagement with what the mind is trying to avoid. When you move toward the thing you fear, even in a reduced form, you disrupt the projection, because now there is something real to measure. And reality rarely matches the intensity of imagination. This is the first break, the moment where the system begins to recalibrate, not because fear disappears, but because it loses precision. Now introduce failure. For many, this is where fear anchors itself, not in the unknown, but in memory. A past attempt that didn't work becomes evidence, then belief, then limitation. But the interpretation is flawed. Failure does not describe you. It describes the attempt. It shows where the structure failed, where execution was incomplete, where assumptions did not hold. That information is not final, it is directional, but only if the process continues. This is where most people exit. They treat failure as a conclusion instead of a correction. And by doing so, they remove themselves from the only system that could produce improvement. Every domain where mastery exists, language, music, physical skill, complex problem solving, relies on repeated failure. Not as an obstacle, but as a mechanism. Each error adjusts the system. Each attempt refines the next. Remove failure, and you remove learning. But the mind resists this, because failure feels personal. It feels like exposure, and exposure triggers retreat. This is where perfection becomes dangerous. Not because it is unattainable, but because it creates a condition that prevents entry. If the standard is flawless execution, and flawless execution requires experience, then action is delayed indefinitely. You wait, you refine, you prepare, but you never begin. And without beginning, nothing evolves. The system remains static. Now consider resilience, not as motivation, not as emotional strength, but as continuity through disruption. The ability to absorb a setback without breaking the pattern, to continue movement even when outcomes fluctuate, to remain engaged when progress is not immediately visible. Because progress is not linear, it accumulates beneath the surface, then appears. Those who understand this do not expect smoothness, they expect variation. They adjust without stopping. They correct without withdrawing. And over time, that continuity compounds. Now shift perspective slightly. When the mind says, "This isn't working," it is often responding to incomplete data. Too few repetitions, too little time, too early in the process. But when that same moment is interpreted as, "This is part of the process," the response changes. You continue. And continuation produces clarity. Not immediately, but inevitably. This is supported by how learning systems operate. Repeated exposure combined with adjustment leads to improvement, not through sudden breakthroughs, but through gradual refinement, which brings everything back to action. Avoid fear, and it becomes more detailed, more convincing, more accurate in its predictions, because it has never been challenged. Act within it, and it begins to lose structure. Each real outcome replaces an imagined one. Each step reduces uncertainty. Over time, something becomes clear, not as belief, but as repeated observation. Fear never predicted the outcome. Failure never defined the path. They only existed at the edge of movement, waiting to see whether you would stop or continue. And once you continue enough times, something shifts permanently. They stop feeling like barriers and start revealing themselves as part of the terrain you were always meant to cross. Chapter 7. Staying focused and productive. The problem is not that you don't have time, it's that your attention is being quietly taken from you, piece by piece, until nothing important ever receives enough of it to grow. Look at how a normal day unfolds. You begin with intention, something you plan to do, something that actually matters, and then the interruptions begin. A message, a notification, a small task that feels urgent but carries no weight. You respond just for a moment, and then another thing appears, and another, until the original task fades into the background. Nothing dramatic happened, but the direction changed. This is how focus is lost, not in a single decision, but through constant fragmentation. The mind is pulled into smaller, easier tasks because they offer immediate closure. You complete something quickly, feel a brief sense of progress, and move on. But those small completions rarely connect to anything meaningful. So the day feels full, but empty. This is why productivity is often misunderstood. It is not about how much you do, It is about whether what you do moves anything forward, responding, reacting, clearing minor tasks. These create activity, but not progress. Progress requires alignment, and alignment begins with priority, not what is urgent, what is essential. Most people never define this clearly. They allow their attention to be directed by whatever appears first, whatever demands response, whatever feels immediate. But immediacy is not importance, it is just proximity. So, the first shift is not in effort, it is in selection. What actually matters enough to deserve your attention today? Once that is defined, everything else becomes secondary, not ignored, but contained. Without that distinction, the mind treats all tasks as equal, and attention disperses across them without depth. Depth is where progress happens. Now consider scale. Large goals create distance, and distance creates delay. Finish the project, write the book, build the system. These feel too large to engage with directly. The mind cannot act on something that it lacks immediate structure, so it postpones, not because it is incapable, because it cannot see the next step. Breaking that distance into smaller, defined actions changes the interaction. One page, one section, one focused hour. Now the task becomes visible, and when something is visible, it becomes actionable. This is where focus stabilizes, not on the entire outcome, on the next executable step. Environment determines whether that step is taken. If your surroundings are filled with interruptions, attention fragments before it has time to settle. A phone within reach, notifications active, multiple inputs competing. These create a constant pull away from depth, and depth requires uninterrupted time. This is not preference, it is structural. The brain takes time to enter focused states. Each interruption resets that process. What feels like a quick check, a message, a notification breaks continuity, and rebuilding that continuity requires effort. This is why controlled environments matter, not as discipline, but as design. Remove what pulls attention away and focus becomes easier. Not effortless, but more stable. The fewer decisions you need to make about where your attention goes, the more of it remains available for what matters. Now introduce time. Without boundaries, attention drifts, tasks expand, overlap, and lose definition. But when time is structured, clear intervals dedicated to specific actions, the mind adjusts. It begins to operate within those constraints. Not because it is forced, because it is guided. Working in defined blocks allows attention to settle. You know what you are doing, for how long, and when it ends. This reduces internal negotiation, the constant questioning of whether you should continue, switch, or stop. Clarity reduces friction, and reduced friction supports focus. But even with structure, resistance appears. There will be moments when attention drifts, when the task feels difficult, when distraction seems easier. This is not failure. It is part of the process. The difference lies in response. Most people follow the drift. They switch tasks, seek easier input, break continuity. But each switch resets progress. The system never stabilizes long enough to produce depth. Remaining with the task, even when attention fluctuates, trains the system. Over time, it becomes easier to stay engaged, not because the task changes, but because your response to resistance changes. This is discipline, not force. Continuation. Now consider clarity again, but at a different level. A vague objective weakens focus. Get more done does not guide action, but a defined outcome. Write 500 words, complete this section, finish this task by a specific time, creates direction. The mind moves toward what is clear and avoids what is not. Physical and mental state influence this more than most people realize. Fatigue reduces attention, stress fragments thinking. Poor energy weakens execution. The system cannot perform consistently if it is not maintained. Sleep, movement, nutrition. These are not separate from productivity. They support it. A clear mind holds focus longer. A stable body sustains effort. Neglect either, and attention degrades. Now return to distraction. It is not random. It is designed to capture attention repeatedly. Social platforms, notifications, constant input, they are structured to interrupt, to pull you away, to create small loops of engagement that feel rewarding but lead nowhere. Without boundaries, they take over. So control must be intentional. Limit access. Define when you engage. Separate focus time from reactive time. This is not restriction, it is protection. Protecting the only resource that determines progress. Attention. Breaks play a role here. Continuous effort without pause reduces quality. Focus declines, errors increase, resistance grows. Short breaks allow recovery, not as escape, but as reset. Step away, return, and attention stabilizes again. Tracking reinforces this system. When progress is visible, focus strengthens. You see movement, you recognize accumulation. Each completed step confirms direction. Without tracking, effort feels disconnected, and disconnected effort fades. Accountability adds another layer. When someone else is aware of your direction, your consistency increases, not from pressure, but from visibility. You are less likely to drift when your actions are not invisible. This stabilizes behavior, and stability produces results. Over time, something changes. Focus becomes easier to access, not because the world becomes less distracting, but because your system becomes less reactive. You choose where attention goes instead of responding to whatever pulls it. And once that shift happens, productivity changes, not in volume, in impact. Because now, what you do actually moves something forward, which leads to a realization that most people avoid until they experience it directly. You were never too busy. You were too fragmented. And once attention stops being divided, progress stops being optional. Chapter 8. Developing self-discipline. What you call a lack of discipline is often just a system that has learned to choose what is easier, faster, and more immediately rewarding, so consistently that it no longer feels like a choice at all. Look closely at your own behavior. You don't wake up intending to drift, to delay, to give in to distraction, yet it happens with a kind of quiet inevitability. Not because you are weak, but because the system you are operating is optimized for short-term comfort, not long-term direction. And once that pattern stabilizes, it runs automatically. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They treat it as force, something you apply against yourself, something you summon when motivation disappears, something you rely on in moments of resistance. But force is unstable. It requires constant energy, and energy fluctuates. So the system collapses. Real discipline is not force. It is structure. It is the ability to align your actions with your long-term direction, even when your immediate state pulls you elsewhere. Not by fighting that pull every time, but by designing a pattern where the right action becomes easier to execute than the wrong one. This is why discipline is not something you are born with. It is something you build. Like any adaptive system, it strengthens through repetition. The more often a behavior is executed under resistance, the more the system recalibrates. What was once difficult becomes neutral. What was neutral becomes automatic. This is observable in habit formation. Repeated actions, performed in consistent contexts, begin to require less conscious effort over time. The brain reduces the need for decision-making and shifts the behavior into a routine. And when something becomes routine, it no longer depends on willpower. This is where habits become foundational, not as small tricks, but as structural components of discipline. When your daily actions are aligned with your goals, and those actions are repeated enough times, they begin to operate without negotiation. You do not ask whether to act. You act, because the system has been trained to do so. But this only works if the habits themselves are aligned. If your routines support distraction, avoidance, or inconsistency, they will reinforce those outcomes just as effectively. The system does not judge direction, it reinforces repetition. So the question becomes precise. What are you repeating every day? And what does that repetition lead to over time? Once that is clear, adjustment becomes possible. Start with one behavior that directly supports your direction. Not a large change, a repeatable one. Something that can be executed consistently without collapse. Over time, that behavior stabilizes. It becomes part of your structure. From there, another can be added. Layer by layer, discipline builds. Not through intensity, through accumulation. Accountability strengthens this process. Promises made internally are easy to adjust, reinterpret, or ignore. But once those same commitments are visible, shared, observed, they carry weight. Not because of pressure, but because of clarity. You are no longer the only one aware of the pattern. And awareness stabilizes behavior. Planning removes another point of failure. When actions are undefined, the mind defaults to easier alternatives. But when the next step is already decided, specific, scheduled, clear, the need to choose is removed. And when choice is removed, execution becomes more likely. Uncertainty creates delay. Clarity reduces it. Now consider temptation. It is constant, not as a singular event, but as a continuous pull toward immediate reward. Social input, comfort, distraction. These are not occasional interruptions. They are always available. So discipline is not about eliminating temptation. It is about reducing its influence. Delayed gratification becomes critical here. The ability to defer immediate reward in favor of long-term gain is not emotional strength. It is pattern recognition. Understanding that what feels good now often conflicts with what produces results later. And once that pattern is recognized, behavior can be adjusted, sometimes directly. Remove what disrupts you, change the environment, limit access, not because you lack control, but because control becomes easier when the system supports it. This is not restriction, it is design. Saying no follows the same structure. Every acceptance consumes time and attention. Every commitment, whether small or large, occupies part of your system. If those commitments do not align with your direction, they create interference. So discipline requires selection, not just of actions, but of what is excluded, because what you allow determines what remains possible. Emotions complicate this further. They fluctuate, often unpredictably, and when they are strong, fatigue, frustration, stress, they alter behavior quickly. The impulse is to stop, to delay, to disengage. But discipline is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to continue despite it. Not by ignoring what you feel, but by not allowing it to determine what you do. This distinction matters, because if action depends on feeling, consistency disappears. And without consistency, nothing stabilizes. Now introduce the modern condition. Immediate gratification is everywhere. Food, information, entertainment, available instantly, requiring no effort. The system adapts to this speed. It begins to expect quick results, fast feedback, immediate reward. But long-term goals do not operate on that timeline. They require delay, effort without instant return, and this creates friction. Discipline is the ability to tolerate that delay, to continue acting even when the result is not visible yet. Because what is being built is not immediate. It is cumulative. Resilience supports this, not as motivation, but as recovery. The ability to return after disruption, to continue after failure, to maintain direction even when progress feels slow. Because setbacks will occur. The system is not designed to avoid them. It is designed to move through them. Each return strengthens the pattern. Each continuation reinforces discipline, and over time something changes. What once required effort begins to feel natural. The actions that once felt forced become part of your baseline. You no longer rely on motivation because the system no longer requires it. This is when discipline becomes identity, not something you do occasionally, something you operate from. And once that shift happens, progress stops depending on how you feel in the moment. It becomes a function of what you have built, which leads to a realization that removes the illusion completely. You were never lacking discipline. You were running a system that rewarded the opposite. And once that system is changed, the outcome changes with it. Chapter 9. Boosting your energy and confidence. You don't run out of energy. You leak it, slowly, through patterns that feel normal enough to ignore. That is why most people never question it. They wake up already tired, move through the day in fragments, rely on short bursts of stimulation to stay alert, and then wonder why nothing sustains, why focus fades, why motivation feels unstable. As if energy were something random, something you either have or don't. But energy is not random, it is regulated. And what you are experiencing is not a lack of energy, but a system that is constantly draining faster than it restores. Look at how it happens. You consume something quick, information, food, stimulation, and it gives you a spike. For a moment you feel sharper, more alert, more capable. Then the drop follows. Not immediately, but predictably. The system dips, and you reach for another spike. This cycle repeats, not because it works, because it is available. The body does not operate on spikes. It operates on stability. What you eat, how you move, how you rest, these are not separate from your performance. They are the conditions that determine it. Processed input creates unstable output. Quick energy leads to quick collapse. Balanced input, on the other hand, produces something different. Sustained output. This is why nutrition matters, not as theory, but as function. Foods that release energy gradually maintain stability. Foods that spike blood sugar disrupt it. You feel this, even if you don't name it. Clarity after a balanced meal, fatigue after a heavy processed one. The pattern is consistent. Movement follows the same logic. It seems counterintuitive, expending energy to gain it, But the body adapts to motion, circulation increases, oxygen delivery improves, systems activate. What feels like effort in the moment becomes capacity over time. This is observable. Even minimal movement, a walk, a short session, shifts the system. Not dramatically, but enough to change how you feel, how you think, how long you can stay engaged. Energy is not conserved by avoiding effort, it is built through it. Now introduce the mental layer. This is where most depletion happens unnoticed. Stress, unresolved thoughts, constant input, these create cognitive load. The mind remains active even when you are not consciously working. It processes, replays, anticipates, and that activity consumes energy, quietly, continuously. This is why moments of stillness matter. Not as escape, as reset, breathing, pausing, stepping away. These are not small acts, they reduce load. They allow the system to return to baseline. Without that reset, fatigue accumulates, even if you're not physically exhausted. Sleep completes the cycle. Without it, nothing stabilizes. The body repairs, the brain processes, the system recalibrates. But quality matters as much as quantity. Interrupted rest produces incomplete recovery, and incomplete recovery carries into the next day. You feel it as fog, reduced focus, slower thinking. This is not lack of discipline, it is lack of restoration. Now shift to confidence. Most people treat confidence as a feeling, something that appears when conditions are right, when results are positive, when certainty is high. But that interpretation makes confidence unstable. Because conditions change, real confidence is not emotional, it is cumulative. It builds from evidence, small, repeated proof that you can act, adjust, and continue. Each completed task, each step taken, each problem handled adds to that evidence. Each completed action confirms capability, and as those confirmations accumulate, hesitation reduces. You no longer rely on assumption, you rely on experience. Now consider internal dialogue. The way you speak to yourself is not neutral, it shapes perception. Repeated negative framing, not enough, not capable, not ready, creates a filter. The system begins to interpret every outcome through that lens. And once that lens stabilizes, confidence weakens. Not because ability is low, because perception is distorted. Adjusting that dialogue changes the system. Not through forced positivity, but through accuracy, recognizing what worked, acknowledging what improved, recording what was completed. This is not exaggeration, it is correction. Failure plays a role here as well. If failure is interpreted as identity, confidence collapses. But if it is interpreted as information, confidence remains intact. Because the system does not see itself as broken, only the method. And methods can be adjusted. This is why exposure matters. Taking risks, small, controlled, repeated, expands the system. Each new situation, each unfamiliar task adds data. Some attempts succeed, others don't, but all contribute. And over time, something shifts. You begin to recognize a pattern. Not that things always work, but that you can handle when they don't. This is where confidence stabilizes, not in certainty, in adaptability. Environment influences this more than most people realize. The people around you shape perception. Support reinforces capability. Negativity distorts it. If your environment constantly reflects doubt, hesitation becomes easier. If it reflects progress, continuation becomes easier. This is not about dependence. It is about input. What you are exposed to becomes part of how you think. Even appearance plays a role. Not superficially, but psychologically. When you take care of how you present yourself, you send a signal to yourself first. That signal reinforces identity. It aligns external expression with internal intention, and alignment strengthens confidence. Now return to balance. Constant effort without recovery leads to depletion. Depletion reduces clarity. Reduced clarity weakens both energy and confidence. So the system must alternate effort, reset, not randomly, intentionally. Because sustainability matters more than intensity, and sustainability requires balance. Over time, these elements begin to connect. Energy stabilizes, confidence accumulates, not through sudden change, through repeated adjustment, which leads to a realization that removes the illusion entirely. You were never lacking energy, you were running a system that drained it. You were never lacking confidence. You just didn't have enough evidence yet. And once both are built, quietly, consistently, The distance between what you want and what you can do begins to disappear. Chapter 10. The power of a positive mindset. What if the biggest limitation in your life is not your circumstances, but the version of reality your mind keeps replaying until it feels permanent? Not because it is true, because it is familiar. That is how most people live. They don't consciously choose a negative or positive mindset. They inherit a pattern of interpretation, repeat it long enough, and then mistake it for truth. Over time, that pattern becomes so stable that it stops feeling like a perspective and starts feeling like reality itself. And once something feels like reality, you stop challenging it. Look closely at what happens when something unexpected occurs. A plan fails, a delay appears, a result doesn't match expectation. Before you even examine the situation, your mind assigns meaning. It compresses the event into a conclusion. This is a problem. This is a setback. This is evidence that something is not working. That conclusion feels immediate, but it is not neutral. It is shaped by how your system has been trained to interpret uncertainty. The brain is designed to detect potential loss faster than potential gain. It prioritizes what could go wrong, amplifies it, and repeats it until it becomes dominant in your perception. This is not an accident. It is a survival bias. But survival bias does not produce growth. Because growth requires you to engage with what is not yet certain, and uncertainty is exactly what this bias is trying to avoid. So if you never interrupt that first interpretation, your behavior narrows without you realizing it. You hesitate earlier, disengage faster, and avoid paths that feel unstable, even when those paths are the only ones that lead forward. This is the quiet cost of an unchecked mindset, not failure. Reduced attempt. Now reverse the mechanism. A positive mindset is not about pretending things are good when they are not. It is about refusing to let the first interpretation close the system. It is the ability to hold the situation open long enough to assign a different meaning, one that allows movement instead of shutting it down. Not "this is a problem I can't solve," but "this is something I don't understand yet." That single shift keeps the system active, and an active system produces action. Action produces data, and data changes perception. This is how mindset evolves. Not through belief, but through interaction with reality. Awareness is where this begins. If you do not see where your mind goes under pressure, you cannot change it. Does it move toward what is controllable, or does it fixate on what is fixed? Does it search for direction, or does it loop through the same limitations? Most people stay inside those loops. They analyze what cannot be changed, revisit what has already happened, and reinforce conclusions that lead nowhere. The system remains busy, but nothing moves. Shifting attention, even slightly, toward what can be influenced changes that dynamic. Because even limited control creates a point of entry. And once you have a point of entry, you can begin. This is not optimism. It is function. Gratitude fits into this structure as a balancing mechanism. Left alone, the mind exaggerates what is missing. It highlights problems, repeats failures, and filters out what is stable. Gratitude reintroduces that stability by forcing attention onto what is already present, what is already working, even in small ways. This does not eliminate difficulty, but it prevents distortion. Because when everything appears negative, the system shuts down. When there is visible stability, even partial, the system remains engaged. And engagement is what allows progress. Environment reinforces this continuously. The people around you, the conversations you engage in, the information you consume, all of it feeds your internal patterns. Over time, repeated exposure becomes internal dialogue, and that dialogue becomes the default way you interpret the world. If that input is consistently negative, your system adopts that tone. If it is constructive, rounded, forward-moving, your system begins to operate differently. This is not influence at the surface level, it is conditioning at the structural level. And conditioning defines your baseline. Now consider the way you speak to yourself. This is not a minor detail. It is a feedback loop. If your internal dialogue constantly frames you as lacking, incapable, or behind, your behavior adjusts accordingly. You take fewer risks, you withdraw earlier, you hesitate more often. But when that dialogue reflects reality more accurately, when it acknowledges progress, recognizes effort, and records what is improved, it creates a different baseline. Not inflated, but stable. And stability supports confidence. Confidence is not created by repeating positive statements. It is built by accumulating evidence. Every action completed, every obstacle handled, every step taken adds to that evidence. Over time, the system begins to recognize a pattern. You act, you adjust, you continue. That pattern becomes belief. Not because you forced it, because you observed it. This is why action and mindset are inseparable. Belief drives action. Action produces results. Results reinforce belief. If the loop is broken at the beginning, if belief prevents action, the entire system remains static. Nothing changes. Failure sits inside this loop as well. If it is interpreted as a final judgment, the system closes. But if it is interpreted as information, the system adjusts. That adjustment allows the loop to continue, and continuation is what produces growth. This is not abstract. It is how learning works. Patience becomes necessary here. Because results do not appear immediately. There is always a gap between effort and visible outcome, and if that gap is misinterpreted as failure, the process stops too early. But if that gap is understood as part of the structure, the system remains engaged long enough for accumulation to take effect. And once it does, the shift is undeniable. You begin to see differently. Not because the world changed, because your interpretation did. Challenges stop looking like fixed obstacles. They become variables you can work with. Failure stops feeling like identity. It becomes feedback, and your own thinking stops feeling permanent. It becomes adjustable, which leads to a realization that most people never reach because they never stay in the process long enough to see it clearly. Your mindset was never just how you think. It was the system deciding what you allow yourself to attempt, how you interpret what happens, and whether you continue or stop. Change that system, and the limits you once believed were real begin to disappear. Not gradually, but as soon as you stop reinforcing them. Chapter 11. Surrounding yourself with the right people. You rarely notice when your thinking changes, but spend enough time around the wrong people, and one day your ambitions will feel unrealistic, your standards will feel excessive, and your own potential will start to sound like exaggeration. Not because anything about you changed, because the environment did. That is how influence works. Quiet, gradual, and almost invisible. You don't adopt someone else's beliefs in a single moment. You absorb patterns, tone, reactions, expectations until they become familiar enough to feel like your own voice. Over time, what once felt possible begins to feel distant, not through evidence, but through repetition. This is why the people around you are not just companions. They are filters. They shape what you consider normal, what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you dismiss before you even test it. If you step into a room where growth is rare, effort is mocked, and ambition is treated as naive, you will not stay unaffected. Even if you resist at first, the constant exposure begins to erode your standards. Not immediately, but steadily, until hesitation feels reasonable and withdrawal feels justified. And once that happens, you don't stop because you failed. You stop because the environment made stopping feel logical. Now reverse the direction. When you are surrounded by people who are moving, quietly, consistently, without constant noise, you begin to notice a different pattern. Effort is not debated. Progress is not dramatized. It is simply part of how they operate. That changes your baseline, because behavior that is repeated around you becomes easier to repeat within you. This is not motivation. It is normalization. The brain aligns with what it sees most often. So when improvement, discipline, and forward movement are common in your environment, they stop feeling exceptional. They become expected. And once something becomes expected, resistance to it decreases. You don't have to force yourself as much. You follow the pattern. This is why encouragement from the right people carries weight. Not because it sounds good, but because it reinforces a direction you are already moving toward. It stabilizes you when your own perception becomes unstable, especially in moments where doubt begins to distort what is actually happening. Everyone experiences those moments where progress feels slow, where effort feels insufficient, where the path seems unclear. In isolation, those moments expand. With the right people, they are contained. A single conversation, a single grounded perspective can recalibrate your thinking back to reality, not inflated optimism, but accurate interpretation. That is what support does. It corrects distortion. Now consider the opposite. Negative environments do not just drain energy, they reshape interpretation. When you are consistently exposed to doubt, complaint, and limitation, your mind begins to anticipate failure before effort. It starts filtering situations through what could go wrong instead of what can be done. That shift happens gradually, but once it stabilizes, it changes how you act. You hesitate more. You attempt less. You withdraw earlier. Not because you decided to, because your system adapted. This is why distance is sometimes necessary, not as rejection, but as protection, because every interaction occupies space, not just in your time, but in your thinking. And if that space is filled with patterns that contradict your direction, you will spend more energy resisting influence than making progress. Reducing that friction is not weakness, it is strategy. At the same time, surrounding yourself with the right people is not limited to seeking guidance from those ahead of you. Mentorship accelerates learning. Yes, because experience compresses mistakes into insight. Someone who has already walked a path sees patterns you cannot yet see. They shorten the trial and error phase. But growth does not depend only on hierarchy. It also depends on alignment. Peers who are moving in the same direction create a different kind of force, shared momentum. You see each other's effort, you recognize the same obstacles, and that recognition reduces isolation. You are no longer operating alone inside your own head. You are part of a pattern, and patterns sustain movement. At the same time, influence is not one-directional. You are not only shaped by your environment, you contribute to it. The way you show up, your consistency, your tone, your willingness to support others feeds back into the system. Strong environments are not built by one person giving and others receiving. They are built through mutual reinforcement. Trust, respect, and accountability form through repeated interaction. And over time, that creates stability, which is what allows growth to continue without constant friction. Beyond individuals, communities extend this effect. When you step into a group aligned around similar values, learning, discipline, improvement, you expand your perception of what is possible. You see different approaches, different strategies, different outcomes, all within the same direction. That variation matters because it prevents your thinking from becoming narrow. It introduces options, and options expand capability. But none of this happens by accident. You do not end up with the right people. You choose them, or you don't. And most people don't, not consciously. They stay where it is familiar, where relationships are already established, where no adjustment is required. But familiarity does not equal alignment, and comfort does not produce growth. So intentionality becomes necessary, not in a forced or artificial way, but in a selective one, paying attention to how you feel after interactions, whether you leave with clarity or confusion, whether your thinking expands or contracts. These signals are not random, they are data. And if you ignore them, you remain in environments that contradict your direction without realizing why progress feels difficult. You may also encounter resistance. Not everyone will understand why you are changing your environment. Some will question it. Some will interpret it as distance, as rejection, or as unnecessary. But most of the time, that reaction reflects their own limitations, not your decision. Because when someone is comfortable inside a fixed pattern, your movement disrupts that pattern. And disruption creates tension. That tension is not your responsibility to resolve. Your responsibility is direction. And direction requires alignment. Over time, as your environment shifts, something else becomes clear. The people around you are not just influencing your behavior, they are reflecting it. They mirror your standards, your expectations, your level of commitment. And as that reflection becomes clearer, your own identity stabilizes. Not based on what you say you want, but based on what you consistently choose to be around. Which leads to a simple but often overlooked realization. You do not become your goals. You become your environment. And once that environment is aligned, progress stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like the natural result of where you chose to stand. Chapter 12. Managing stress and staying motivated. Stress does not come from pressure. It comes from the moment your mind loses a clear path forward. Two people can face the same situation, the same deadline, the same uncertainty, yet one moves steadily while the other locks up, not because the situation is different, but because one system stays operational and the other collapses under interpretation. That distinction matters, because stress by itself is neutral. It is simply a signal that something requires energy, attention, or adaptation. But the moment your mind interprets that signal as overload, as threat, as something unmanageable, the system begins to tighten. And once it tightens, clarity disappears first, then action, then control. You felt this before. A situation expands too quickly, variables stack on top of each other, and instead of focusing on what can be done next, your mind jumps ahead, projecting outcomes, imagining failure, looping through possibilities that haven't even happened yet. That is not the problem itself. That is the amplification. And most people try to solve stress at the level of the situation, when in reality, it must be addressed at the level of response, because the situation may not change immediately, but your response always can. The first shift is simple, but rarely practiced. Reduce the field. When everything feels out of control, it is usually because your attention is spread across too many variables at once. The system is trying to process the entire problem instead of isolating the next actionable piece. So instead of asking how to solve everything, you narrow it. What is the next step that is actually within reach? Not the outcome, not the entire process, just the next movement. That reduction changes the load instantly, because clarity reduces pressure. And pressure without clarity is what creates overwhelm. This is not avoidance, it is sequencing. You are not ignoring the full problem, you are refusing to process it all at once. And once you take that step, something shifts. The system reactivates. You move, and movement breaks paralysis. Setbacks complicate this further, because when something doesn't go as planned, the mind tends to attach meaning quickly, often interpreting the disruption as failure, as evidence that something is wrong, that the effort is not working, that the direction is flawed. But that interpretation is premature, because a single result does not define a pattern. It is simply data. And if you treat it as data, you stay operational. You adjust, you refine, you continue. But if you treat it as identity, the system shuts down. That distinction determines whether stress compounds or dissolves. Physical state plays a role here that most people underestimate. When your body is depleted, your threshold for stress drops significantly. The same problem that would be manageable under normal conditions begins to feel overwhelming when sleep is compromised, when movement is limited, when nutrition is inconsistent. This is not abstract, it is physiological. Energy is not just a mental resource, it is systemic. And when the system is depleted, your capacity to process pressure decreases. Movement, even in simple forms, resets part of that system. A walk, stretching, breathing, that is slower than your current state. These are not small actions, they are interruptions. They break the escalation cycle and give the system a chance to stabilize before it continues. Emotional load builds in a similar way. When you move from one demand to another without pause, without reset, the accumulation creates friction that eventually spills into everything else. Focus drops, patience shortens, decisions become reactive instead of intentional. Which is why spacing matters. Not long breaks, just moments of disengagement. Enough to reset the signal, enough to prevent buildup. Another layer appears when you try to carry everything alone. There is a tendency to equate control with self-reliance, to assume that handling everything personally is a sign of strength, but in reality, it often leads to unnecessary strain. Delegation is not loss of control, it is redistribution. When you allow others to contribute, the system becomes more efficient, not weaker, and the load becomes shared instead of concentrated. That shift reduces stress at the structural level. Environment also influences how stress manifests. A cluttered, chaotic space amplifies cognitive load, while a structured, predictable environment reduces it. This is not about aesthetics, it is about signal clarity. When your surroundings are aligned with your intention, fewer decisions are required to maintain focus, and fewer decisions reduce fatigue. Mindfulness enters here as a stabilizer, not as a concept, but as a function. The ability to return attention to what is actually happening instead of what might happen, what already happened, or what could go wrong. When attention returns to the present, the system simplifies. You are no longer processing multiple timelines. You are engaging with one moment. And one moment is always manageable. Scarcity thinking intensifies stress further. The belief that time is running out, that resources are insufficient, that energy is limited beyond recovery, this creates urgency without direction. But when you shift to recognizing available options, even if they are limited, the system changes again. Because possibility reintroduces movement, and movement reduces pressure. Expectation must also be calibrated. If you demand constant output without allowing recovery, without accounting for variation, stress becomes inevitable, not because you are incapable, but because the system is being pushed beyond sustainable limits. Perfection amplifies this, because it removes margin. And without margin, every deviation feels like failure. But progress does not require perfection. It requires continuity, returning even after disruption, continuing even after interruption, re-engaging even when conditions are not ideal. Priorities anchor all of this. When you know what matters most, decisions simplify. You stop reacting to every demand. You start filtering. And filtering reduces overload. Because not everything deserves your attention. Stress does not disappear. It reorganizes. It becomes something you move through instead of something that stops you. And over time, that changes how you experience pressure entirely. It no longer feels like something that controls your direction. It becomes something that signals where attention is needed next. And once you see that clearly, the relationship shifts. Stress is no longer the weight that holds you back. It becomes the indicator that you are engaged with something that matters, and that the next step is still available as long as you choose to take it. Chapter 13. Mastering time and productivity. Time never truly runs out. It is quietly redistributed by the patterns you repeat without noticing, and that is why most people reach the end of a day feeling depleted yet strangely unaccomplished, not because they lacked hours, but because their attention was fragmented into pieces too small to build anything meaningful. The illusion begins with control. People say they want to manage time, but time does not respond to intention. It moves at a fixed pace, indifferent to urgency, pressure, or desire, and the only variable that ever shifts is how attention is allocated within it. What you call not enough time is often a misalignment between what you claim matters and what you actually give your focus to, repeated so consistently that it becomes your default structure. When that structure is left unexamined, something predictable happens. Low-value tasks expand to fill space. Urgent signals override important ones, and the day becomes a sequence of reactions rather than a sequence of deliberate actions, which explains why many people feel busy yet remain unchanged, because movement without direction produces activity but not progress. Clarity interrupts this. Not vague intention, but precise hierarchy. An understanding of what truly moves your life forward, what merely maintains it, and what only consumes attention without return. Once this hierarchy is defined, decisions stop feeling like constant negotiation and begin to operate as filtering mechanisms, where anything misaligned is recognized early and removed before it absorbs time that cannot be recovered. This is where most people hesitate, because defining priorities forces trade-offs, and trade-offs expose cost, and cost requires you to acknowledge that every yes you give is simultaneously a no to something else, often something more important, which is why overcommitment rarely feels like a problem in the moment, but reveals itself later as exhaustion without results. Saying no, then, is not social resistance. It is structural discipline. It protects alignment by preventing dilution, ensuring that your time is not scattered across conflicting directions, but concentrated enough to create momentum in one. Large goals complicate this concentration when they remain abstract, because the mind struggles to act on what it cannot sequence, and what cannot be sequenced tends to be delayed, not out of laziness, but out of ambiguity. The solution is not more motivation, it is resolution. Breaking the outcome into units that can be executed without hesitation, where each step is small enough to begin immediately, but meaningful enough to contribute to the larger direction. Which is why writing a single page consistently produces more progress than repeatedly planning an entire book. Once action becomes defined at this level, resistance decreases because the system no longer faces an undefined mass, but a clear entry point. Energy patterns reinforce this further. Focus is not constant across the day. It rises and falls in predictable cycles. Yet most people ignore this and attempt to perform complex work during low energy periods while wasting high energy periods on trivial tasks, which creates unnecessary friction and reinforces the belief that productivity requires more effort than it actually does. When you align demanding tasks with periods of clarity and reserve routine tasks for periods of lower energy, output stabilizes without increasing strain because you are no longer working against your own system. Environment plays a quieter but equally decisive role. Every object, every unfinished task, every unresolved signal competes for attention, even when you are not consciously aware of it, creating a background load that reduces your capacity to focus deeply on a single task, which is why a disordered space often produces disordered thinking. Organizing your environment is not about control for its own sake. It is about reducing competing inputs so that attention can remain where it is needed without constant redirection. Distractions operate as interruptions within this system, fragmenting attention and forcing repeated restarts, which extend the time required to complete even simple tasks because each interruption resets part of the cognitive process. Removing distractions is more effective than resisting them because resistance requires energy, while absence removes the decision entirely, preserving focus for what matters. Breaks, when used correctly, restore the system rather than disrupt it. Continuous effort without pause degrades performance over time, narrowing attention and increasing error, while structured intervals of work, followed by short periods of disengagement, maintain clarity and prevent accumulation of fatigue. This is not inefficiency. It is sustainability. Without it, productivity declines even as effort increases. Balance emerges from this structure, not as a luxury, but as a requirement. When all time is directed toward output without recovery, the system eventually destabilizes, leading to burnout, reduced motivation, and inconsistent performance, whereas integrating recovery maintains long-term stability, allowing consistent progress rather than intermittent bursts, followed by collapse. Over time, as these adjustments accumulate, something shifts. You are not doing more. You are doing what matters with less friction. Tasks that once felt heavy become manageable. Decisions that once required effort become automatic, and time begins to feel less constrained, not because it expanded, but because it is no longer being consumed by misalignment. This leads to a realization that changes how you see everything that came before. Time was never the problem. It was the absence of structure, the lack of clarity, the unexamined patterns that quietly redirected your attention away from what mattered most. And once those patterns are corrected, time does not feel abundant. It feels precise, sufficient, and exactly aligned with the direction you chose to move. Chapter 14. Building resilience and never giving up. Most people don't collapse at the moment of impact. They collapse in the silent second after, when the mind quietly decides what the impact means. And that decision is almost always premature. That distinction is subtle, but it decides everything. Because the impact itself is rarely what stops people. It is the meaning they assign to it afterward, the quiet conclusion forming in the background that says, this is where it ends, long before anything is actually over. And once that conclusion is accepted, the system begins to shut down. Not dramatically, but gradually. Less effort, less risk, less engagement, until what once felt possible becomes something you no longer even attempt. This is why resilience is not about strength in the traditional sense. It is about interpretation under pressure. When something breaks, fails, or collapses, the mind immediately tries to categorize the event, to compress it into a narrative it can understand, and most of the time it chooses the fastest explanation, not the most accurate one. I'm not good enough. This isn't for me. I should stop. These are not facts. They are shortcuts. And shortcuts are efficient, but they are often wrong. Resilience begins the moment you refuse that shortcut. Not by denying the difficulty, but by delaying the conclusion, by staying in the process long enough to extract something more useful than defeat. Because failure, when examined correctly, is not a wall. It is data. It shows you where the system broke, where assumptions failed, where execution did not match reality. And data, unlike judgment, can be used. This is why the people who move forward are not the ones who avoid failure, but the ones who refuse to finalize it too early. They keep the loop open. They adjust, test, and re-enter, And that loop, repeated over time, becomes resilience. Not as a personality trait, but as a function, a way of operating when conditions are unstable. But this requires something most people are not trained to do: to remain active inside uncertainty. Because uncertainty feels like anger. The brain prefers closure, even if the closure is negative, because certainty reduces tension. And giving up provides immediate certainty. It answers the question. It ends the discomfort, but it also ends the possibility. Resilient individuals tolerate that tension longer. They allow the question to remain open. They move without full clarity. And that ability to act without complete resolution is what keeps progress alive when others stop. This is where persistence changes its form. It is no longer stubborn repetition. It becomes intelligent continuation. You are not doing the same thing again and again. You are updating, refining, repositioning. Each attempt is different, even if the goal remains the same. And over time, the system adapts. What once overwhelmed you becomes manageable. Not because the challenge shrank, because your capacity expanded. But capacity is not built in isolation. It is supported. The people around you matter more than most realize. Not in a motivational sense, but in a structural one. Because when your internal narrative becomes distorted, when you start misreading your own progress, others can correct the signal. They can reflect back what you cannot currently see. They stabilize perception, and stable perception leads to better decisions, which leads to continued movement. Without that, doubt compounds, and compounded doubt reduces action, which halts the process. Physical and emotional condition amplify this effect. A fatigued system interprets challenges as heavier than they are. Stress narrows focus, reduces flexibility, and increases the likelihood of negative conclusions, which is why resilience is not only mental, it is physiological. A maintained system absorbs more pressure, a depleted one fractures under less. This is not weakness, it is mechanics. Energy influences interpretation, interpretation influences action, and action determines outcome. Change introduces another layer of difficulty, because most people are not reacting to the challenge itself, but to the loss of expectation. Things did not unfold as predicted, and the mind resists that deviation. It tries to return to the original plan instead of adapting to the current reality. But resilience does not restore old maps, it redraws them. It works with what is present, not what was supposed to happen. This flexibility keeps the process moving. Because rigidity under shifting conditions guarantees stagnation, adaptation preserves momentum. A growth-oriented system reinforces this. Not as a slogan, but as a working model. Skills are not fixed. They respond to effort. They evolve through repetition. When this becomes clear, failure loses its identity as an endpoint. It becomes part of a sequence. And once something is part of a sequence, it cannot define you. It can only inform you, which removes its power to stop you. Forgiveness plays a critical role here, not as an emotional gesture, but as a functional release. Holding on to past errors keeps the system anchored to unchangeable states. It consumes attention. It reduces capacity for forward movement. Letting go is not about forgetting. It is about freeing resources. Resources that can be redirected toward progress. Patience binds all of this together, because resilience does not produce immediate visible results. There are regressions. Periods where effort feels disconnected from outcome, moments where nothing seems to move. But if the process remains active, those moments integrate into growth rather than interrupt it. You continue, even when the signal is weak, and then something shifts. Not suddenly, gradually. You notice that what once stopped you no longer does. Where you once hesitated, you now proceed. Where you once withdrew, you now adjust, not because the path became easier, because your system became more stable inside difficulty. And that stability changes the equation. Because once you can continue regardless of conditions, the number of attempts increases, the quality of adjustments improves, and the likelihood of success rises. Not by chance, by structure. Which leads to a realization that is easy to miss if you stop too early. Resilience is not what you use after failure. It is what prevents failure from closing the system. And as long as the system remains open, progress remains possible. Chapter 15. The Power of Gratitude and Positivity. The more you chase what you don't have, the less you are able to see what is already working. That is the paradox. Because the instinct feels correct. identify what's missing, fix it, improve. But when that instinct becomes dominant, it blinds the system to existing stability, and a mind that cannot detect stability cannot build on it. So it keeps chasing, and still feels behind. Gratitude interrupts that loop, not by adding anything new, but by revealing what was never registered. Most people assume gratitude is a reaction to favorable conditions, something that appears after success, after relief, after things finally work. But in reality, it functions before all of that. It changes the frame through which conditions are interpreted. And that frame determines whether something is seen as insufficient or as usable. This is why two people can exist in the same situation and extract completely different experiences. Not because reality changed, because perception filtered it differently. And perception is not neutral. It is trained. If the mind is repeatedly directed toward what is lacking, it becomes efficient at detecting absence. It sharpens that ability, which sounds useful, but over time it creates a distorted model of reality, one where progress is minimized, stability is ignored, and only gaps are highlighted. That distortion generates pressure, and pressure, sustained long enough, becomes exhaustion. Gratitude rebalances that system. Not by denying problems, but by widening the field of detection. You begin to notice not just what is broken, but what is functioning, not just what is missing, but what is present. And that dual awareness stabilizes perception. Research in cognitive psychology has consistently shown that attention shapes emotional regulation more than external conditions themselves, and when individuals deliberately shift attention toward positive anchors, even small ones, the nervous system reduces its threat response. Heart rate variability improves. Stress hormones decrease. Clarity increases. This is not abstract. It is measurable, and once the system stabilizes, decision quality improves. You respond instead of react, which changes outcomes over time. Gratitude also alters social dynamics in ways most people underestimate. Because recognition creates feedback loops. When you acknowledge someone's effort, their presence, their contribution, you reinforce that behavior. You strengthen connection, and connection reduces friction, which makes collaboration easier, which increases opportunities. So what looks like a simple thank you becomes a structural adjustment in the environment. And that environment feeds back into your own system. Internally, the effect is even more critical, because most people track their failures with precision and their progress with neglect. They remember what went wrong in detail, but what went right fades quickly. This creates an imbalance in self-perception, a system that concludes not enough even when evidence suggests otherwise. Gratitude corrects that imbalance. It forces recognition, not inflated praise. Accurate accounting. You begin to register small completions, small movements forward, small acts of discipline that would otherwise be ignored. And those accumulations change identity. Not through belief, through evidence. Energy follows this shift, because attention directs energy allocation. When the system constantly detects lack, it conserves, contracts, hesitates. When it detects presence, even partial, it expands, engages, continues. Which is why people operating from gratitude often appear more energized, not because they have more resources, because they are not draining themselves through constant deficit scanning. The practice itself remains simple, but its effect depends entirely on consistency. A brief pause, a deliberate recognition, a moment where attention is redirected intentionally rather than automatically. Repeated daily, this rewires baseline perception. It becomes less of an action and more of a default. Journaling strengthens this process by externalizing attention. Writing anchors recognition. It prevents the mind from immediately reverting to its habitual scan. And over time, it creates a record, evidence that challenges the illusion of stagnation. Because when reviewed, the pattern becomes visible. Progress exists, even if it felt invisible in the moment. There will be resistance to this, especially during difficult periods. Because the mind, under stress, narrows its focus to threat. And in that state, gratitude can feel irrelevant, forced, unrealistic. But that is precisely when it becomes functional, not as optimism, as stabilization. If you can identify even one stable element in the middle of instability, you anchor perception, and that anchor prevents total collapse. It keeps the system operational, which is enough to continue. And continuation is always more valuable than emotional certainty. Because progress compounds through movement, not through feeling ready. Gratitude also reshapes your relationship with time. Most people postpone satisfaction, attaching it to a future condition. When the goal is reached, when the situation improves, when everything aligns. But that creates a delay loop, where the present is always insufficient and satisfaction is always deferred. Gratitude breaks that loop. It extracts value from the current state, even if incomplete, which removes the dependency on future validation. And once that dependency is removed, motivation stabilizes, because it is no longer waiting, it is operating. This ties back to everything before: resilience, discipline, focus, because all of them depend on a system that can remain stable under pressure. And gratitude contributes to that stability, not by making life easier, by making perception more accurate, which leads to a quieter realization. Nothing new has been added, nothing external has fundamentally changed, but what you are able to see has expanded. And once perception expands, the same life begins to produce different outcomes. Not because it improved overnight, because you stopped filtering out the parts that were already working. Something inside you just shifted, quietly, but permanently. Thank you for being here with Book Sounds Better You. Stay for the next video. Sometimes what changes you isn't what you learn next, but what finally makes sense.